Good evening. I hope you enjoyed your meal this evening, and I believe there's some seconds back there if you're extra hungry. If you did not find the cheesecake and pecan pie, it's where the people are now. Right there, so help yourself to some dessert. Again, thank you to Chef Sharif and Ambrosia Catering for the delicious meal this evening, so thank you. I'm delighted to welcome you to Vanderbilt Divinity School and have the pleasure of introducing to you the Dean of Vanderbilt Divinity School, the Reverend Dr. Emily Towns, who is, of course, the Dean here and the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Professor of Womanist Ethics and Society. She has been a fantastic Dean of my Divinity School, and I am proud to call her now my Dean. So, Dean Towns, if you would please come give us a few words of introduction.
Thank you. It's so good to see you here tonight. We've been waiting for you for, I think, about 9 months when you first got in touch with us. It is indeed an honor to have such a room full of people of goodwill and earnest commitment to the work of the church, the work of who we can be and how we can be in a society that clearly needs us. And we need each other. So it is a moment of personal privilege for me. I think that the only other Divinity School person here is our Associate Dean, Melissa Snar. And together we create great mischief in the name of the Lord. So welcome. It's so good to have you here. I trust that these days together you will spend will be rich and full. And I know Iba will have something very helpful to say. Or something. Or something. So enjoy your time here in Nashville, those of you who are not native to the city. And I hope that maybe a little piece of the kingdom, the realm of God, will break out. Take care.
Thank you, Dean. I want to point out Reverend Mark Forrester, who's the university chaplain here at Vanderbilt University. We welcome you. He'll be participating with us. And would like to call on Mark Henshaw. Where did he go? There he is, right there. He's hiding, who will introduce our speaker for the evening.
It's my pleasure to introduce to you Eboo Patel. Eboo Patel, of course, as you know, he is one of the central interfaith leaders in our nation. He served as President Obama's on President Obama's inaugural Faith Council. He is a best-selling author. Amongst the titles that he has written are Acts of Faith, Sacred Ground, and Interfaith Leadership, a primer, a book that each of you will receive as a part of your participation in the conference. He is a Rhodes Scholar. He's an inspired speaker, a tireless voice for the value of interreligious relationship. And he was on the Texas Wesleyan campus about a year and a half ago, I guess. And so I want to share just a tiny little story that stemmed from his presence on our campus. During the time that he was there, we had some wonderful engagements. And amongst the participants were 2 bishops. And if you know anything about the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the Dallas-Fort Worth area is essentially one big city, but politically it is divided right down the middle. And so folks from Fort Worth really don't talk to folks from Dallas very much, and vice versa. And so, of course, the Methodist Church in its wisdom would subdivide Dallas and Fort Worth between 2 annual conferences represented by 2 different bishops. And While Ibu was on our campus, both the bishops, the bishop from Dallas and the bishop from Fort Worth, came and listened to his presentation. These individuals represent sort of polar opposite sides of the theological spectrum. And one of the things I can say about Ibu is that he was able to reach both of them in a profound way. And this says so much about who Ibu is and the value of the message that he brings to us, that he was able to engage both of those bishops such that they came up to me after his presentation, and both of them said that they had been inspired to encourage new interfaith engagement within their annual conferences. And that's quite a statement if you know very much about bishops or had the opportunity to interact with bishops very much. So it is truly my pleasure to introduce Ibu Patel, a true friend and an inspired speaker on the value of interfaith engagement. Ibu?
See, I'm like strawberry ice cream. Except on my staff, where I think I have the opposite effect that I did on these two theologically warring bishops, my colleagues, my senior colleagues, like, well, how is it that every time you open your mouth at staff, everybody gets mad at you? So I need to bring some of the strawberry ice cream back to Chicago. So I'm so honored to be here. I'm so honored you all came. Thank you, Dean Downs, for you coming. So I'm going to do something a little bit dangerous tonight. I want to offer a set of half-formed thoughts. So for anybody who might have seen me speak before, typically when I get up and there's a microphone present, I've got 45 minutes worth of inspiring comments about the importance of interfaith cooperation, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a smaller room and a closed space, and we are in a really challenging moment. And I've been thinking some new thoughts that are perhaps dangerous thoughts, certainly half-formed thoughts. And I want to share them with you, and I want to see what you think. So the frame of this is, what does it mean to build a healthy, religiously diverse democracy? What does it mean to build a healthy, religiously diverse democracy? And I want to use as the Virgil to my Dante, to begin with, John Courtney Murray. So John Courtney Murray was a mid-20th century Jesuit priest, political philosopher, wrote a highly influential volume called We Hold These Truths. And at the beginnings of that volume, he basically asked the question, what does it mean if your society is pluralist? And amongst the hard questions he asks are this: how much difference can a diverse democracy take? Hello, Dr. Arya Raja. So nice to see you. I was just getting into John Courtney Murray, so you arrived just at the right time. How much difference can a diverse democracy take, and how much unity does it require? How much difference can a diverse democracy take, and how much unity does it require? So you know what I love about that? That he recognizes up front that diversity isn't rocket science, it's harder. A diverse democracy, John Courtney Murray says, is a political community that can hold together groups with divergent views. But in order for that to happen, there has to be an underlying political community to begin with. What of that political community do we agree upon? How is it that it can be called a community? One of the ways that I've come to define religiously diverse democracy is this: a democracy is a place where people elect their representatives, but also where people get to make their personal convictions public. That is not the case in dictatorships. What dictatorships do is they quash all sorts of identities. In a democracy, if you are pro-choice, you can stand out right outside Vanderbilt's campus, probably on the campus itself, and you can use a megaphone to shout your views. You can hand out flyers. You can raise money for a pro-choice candidate. You can run for office as a pro-choice candidate yourself. And if you're pro-life, you can do the exact same thing. A democracy is a society in which you can make your personal convictions public. What's diversity? Well, diversity is not just the differences we like. If there's one thing you remember from this talk, it's this. Diversity is not just the differences we like. During the Trump campaign, my kids were old enough to pay attention. I was like, this is a cartoon. This isn't real. This is a cartoon. Well, my birthday is November 9th. And one of the things, after we got over the shock, we told our kids is, we live in a neighborhood that's 90-10 for Hillary. By the way, nobody honked in our neighborhood that morning. Like literally, all day, right? And it was my birthday, I took it off. Nobody honked. It was like a funeral, right? I'm like, look, the 5 kids you know whose parents are Trump supporters, you are not gonna be jerks to them. It took me until about noon to say that, right? But like the one, like seriously, the one dad you know who doesn't wear a suit in the morning to go to work, who's a landscaper and has a pickup truck, you're not gonna be a jerk to his kid at school. I don't like this difference. Diversity is not just the differences you like. You live in a diverse democracy. The differences that you don't like get to be made public too. What about religion? Religion, per Tillich, ultimate concerns. Can we see why John Courtney Murray said, what kind of differences can a diverse democracy take? If a democracy is a place where you can make your personal convictions public, and diversity is not just the differences you like, and people are allowed to disagree, have differences on matters of ultimate concerns, and they can make those disagreements public, is it any wonder that literally for centuries, political philosophers thought you needed homogeneity to be a democratic society? Because if you had real difference on matters of ultimate concerns, it was a recipe for civil war. Literally, political philosophers from the time of the Greeks thought that the only way to have a democracy was if it was homogeneous. If you wanted diversity, it had to be an empire, had to be a dictatorship. This is a really interesting note in Michael Walzer's book, What It Means to Be an American. By the way, Walzer ends that section and begins the next one with the words, until the United States of America. First nation, first formal political entity of this size to believe that you could have diversity in a democracy. I'll circle back to that towards the end. So what does it mean for a situation that is a recipe for civil war to be healthy? So here's what I think it means. I think it means that people have to recognize that they will disagree on some fundamental things and still work together on other things. We will disagree on some fundamental things and work together on other things. You will not be a jerk to the guy who puts on overalls and has a pickup truck and goes landscaping and has a Trump sticker on that truck. You will not be a jerk, because there's only 5 of those kids that we know in the school. You will not be jerks to them. What kinds of conflicts can we expect in a religiously diverse democracy? In other words, what kinds of people who disagree on fundamental things do we expect to work together on other fundamental things? So I'm going to tell a story that my friend Mark Hanshaw told me, and a story that I tell like every other college campus that I'm at, because for me, it so deeply embodies an identity conflict that I think is what I call a legitimate view versus legitimate view identity conflict. Like, I get both of you. You both have a right to exist. You both of your identities matter, and the way you are registering them in public is intention. So Mark was part of a seminar that I was a part of a couple years ago, faculty seminar called Teaching Interfaith. And I co-facilitate it with Lori Patton, who's the president of Middlebury College, and Lori has this great pedagogy where she says, bring the case that you've come across as a teacher that keeps you up at night, because it's so hard to solve. Don't bring an easy case, right? Bring a case that you find intellectually, ethically, civically, extremely challenging. So Mark brings this one. He's teaching. It is possible that I've embellished a little along the way, by the way. You are now going to hear that embellishment. I've added a bell and a whistle, maybe a blowhorn. So Mark's teaching world religions at Texas Wesleyan 5, 7, 10 years ago. And he's opening up the course. He's opening up the unit on Islam. And if I remember the story correctly, he does something along the lines of plays the adhan, the Muslim call to prayer, on his computer, or does some Quranic recitation, plays it over the loudspeaker to give students kind of a visceral sense of the tradition. The Quran, by the way, means recitation, right? So it is in effect meant to be recited, right? So Mark, as a good professor, wanted his students to have something of a visceral sense of this. And there's a student who's starts to kind of sweat in the class and starts to shake a little bit. And Mark notices this, and the other students kind of notice this, and finally this guy picks up his stuff and leaves, just walks out, right? Mark goes on with class and was like, what's going on? So the student comes to Mark next day and says, look, I did 3 tours of duty in Iraq. I have a dozen friends who were killed to the soundtrack of what you just did in there. I can't listen to it. I can't listen to anything. I can't look at a Quran. I can't hear the word. I can't do it, right? I have PTSD, and the doctor has diagnosed it. So there is an academic question here. Do you require this student to do the Islam section? I've been to Texas Wesleyan. I love that place because there's people from all walks of life there. A bunch of vets there, a bunch of Muslims there. Muslims in Mark's class. What happens if one of the Muslims is like, hey, how come John shows up for Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, and Buddhism, but he's gone for these 3 weeks of Islam? Mark looks at that student and is like, well, I'm sorry, John can't look at the sacred text of your religion by which you live your life, because when he does it, a video plays in his head of his friends dying on the road in Baghdad by IEDs. So, what do you do? What do you do? Right? I mean, is that Muslim kid, does she not have a right to be like deeply, deeply hurt and offended? That vet, is he not a vet? Did that not happen to him? Right? Did that not happen to him? So, welcome to inconvenient differences, right? Welcome to a diverse democracy. It's not just the differences. We choose. What do you do in that situation? So, look, I think in the best of circumstances, that's a really tough situation. We don't live in the best of circumstances, right? We live in an era that is marked by many things. I want to talk about something that I don't talk about very much, which is, I think, the most dangerous problem of our time, which is tribalism. So here's what I would say about tribalism. Andrew Sullivan's got an essay he wrote for New York Magazine some weeks back, which I'm happy to share with folks. I'm going to quote what he says, and then I'm going to use the example that he uses. Actually, I'll begin with the example. He says, it's interesting in Inuit/Eskimo culture, those terms are used interchangeably by folks who are not in it, right? Which, by the way, he's not in it, right? So let's call him like potentially an informed observer on this. But he says actually the words mean very different things. Inuit translates directly as human. Eskimo translates directly as one who eats raw meat. Signal, not human. This culture has a language for the children of light and the children of darkness. You are one of mine, you are not. Right? You belong, you're human, Inuit. You have human parts, but I'm going to name you differently. One who eats raw meat. So there's a moment in my top handful of American plays is Angels in America. Anybody see Angels in America? I mean, it changed my life. It changed my life. I saw it when I was 18. I saw it like 3 times in 3 months. And there's a moment at the beginning which is done with levity, but I remember how stark it was. Lewis, one of the central characters, thinks that this guy Joe, who he meets somewhere in New York, is cute, and starts being friendly with him. And Joe's friendly back, and Lewis at some point says to Joe, "I'm gay," wink, wink. Joe says, this is all done with levity. Joe says, "You guys all look so somber." Joe says, "Well, I'm Mormon. We don't believe in gay people." And Lewis says, "Oh, we don't believe in Mormons." Right? And it's hilarious. And it's a really interesting mark of tribalism. I literally don't believe in you, Eskimo. I don't believe in you. You don't exist. Trump voter, pro-life, you don't exist. I don't believe in you. Here's what Andrew Sullivan says about tribalism. One of the great attractions of tribalism is that you don't actually have to think very much. All you need to know on any given subject is which side you're on. You pick up signals from everyone around you. You slowly winnow your acquaintances to those who will reinforce your worldview. A tribal leader calls the shots and everything slips into place. After a while, your immersion in tribal loyalty makes the activities of another tribe not just alien, but close to incomprehensible. So I'll give a small example of this from my very charmed life. So I go to college campuses for a living. I'm on like 20 or 25 a year, about 1 a week. And, just last few weeks, I was at the University of Mount Union, where was my man Kyle, who's super sick of seeing me by now. He's like, I've heard that story for the 3rd time, right? I was there 2 days ago. A month ago, I was at the University of Tennessee. Week after that, I was at Amherst, right? It's like kind of bang, bang, bang. And part of what I want to do is I want to bring a little bit of this place to the other place, right? So I'm at Amherst with my man Noah, and I'm interested that, people are introducing themselves. They're like, Katie, she, hers, right? And I know what that is. I live in that world, right? I live in that world. And one of the things that I'm struck by is that when I'm at the University of South Carolina, at that interfaith circle, people are introducing themselves saying, Katie, Baptist Church, Megan, Presbyterian Church, Sue, Methodist Church. So I brought that up. It's like, I'm just interested in the cultural patterns of how people introduce themselves. So this is how you introduce yourself, right? And when I was here, this is how this group introduces themselves. I thought that I was bringing a cultural artifact from one place to another place. So I got a feedback letter from my friend, the chaplain there. Wasn't taken as, here's an interesting cultural practice from elsewhere. I had committed treason. I had committed treason. I had been amongst a different community. I had noted a different kind of introduction practice. It wasn't just these people do it differently, it's we do it justly. This is justice. Inuit, Eskimo. Campuses. It's the role of campuses. So, John Courtney Murray says of a campus, it is a place where creeds can be at war intelligibly. Alistair McIntyre says, the purpose of a campus is to initiate people into conflict, to initiate students into conflict. That is really interesting, right? In other words, what these two people are saying, I like it, but this is a half-formed thought. This isn't a speech I've been giving for a decade. They're saying you should expect different tribes on your campus. Expect the Iraq vet who doesn't want to be in the Islam section because he starts to shake when he hears the Quran. Expect the Muslim student who closes her eyes and views it as prayer. Expect them to sit next to each other. It's not a tribe. It is divergent groups held together by a political community. So what should campuses be? Creeds at war intelligibly, places to initiate students into conflict. There are multiple ways that people introduce themselves. Or there's only one way. Our way. A just way. Inuit, Eskimo. What do we do? So, all of this is half-formed. I'm going to keep saying that, right? One is, I think we define reality. I think this is reality. In other words, the way I loved the way that Mark told that story was this is not a distraction. This is what it means to teach a world religions class. Like, welcome to diversity. Did you expect it to be easy? Would you prefer that Iraq vets not be in the class? Would you, we don't believe in you. You can't be here. Or does that guy get to be who that guy is? And the Muslim kid gets to be who she is. And the job of a campus, and the job of a professor, and the job of a chaplain, as unbelievably hard as it is to create the community that can hold together the divergent groups. So, you expect conflict. You expect it, right? I mean, my dippy but most favorite metaphor these days is when the mountain climber approaches the mountain, she doesn't say, "What the hell are you doing there?" She came to climb the mountain. If you're in a diverse democracy, of which probably amongst the most essential embodiments is the American campus, the mountain is the conflict between identity tribes. That's what we came to climb. Expect it. Number 3, recognize your own biases. So here's my bias. I've spent, I'm 42. I went to college in 1993, 25 years in the progressive diversity movement, a movement that I would say I probably still have 7 toes in, if people haven't shoved me out of it yet. So I think about people of color a lot. I think about immigrants a lot. I mean, that's me. That's my dad, right? Like, I remember my parents owned Subway sandwich shops when I was growing up. My uncle owned them in California. I trained at my uncle's stores. I was 14, 15 years old. And I'm in there making sandwiches, and a guy walks in, and he looks at me, and he looks at the woman standing next to me, and he says, "She's gonna make my sandwich." And I'm like, I know I just started, but I could do it. I'm good. I'm good at it. And he's like, "I don't care how long ago you started. She's gonna make my sandwich." And I looked at her, and I looked at him, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, okay, I get it." I just stepped back. She was white. I'm gonna just carry that with me, right? Like that's like, when I was 14, 15, you know what? I wasn't even that mad. That's just how the world is. I knew enough about the world by that point to know that. So I carry that, right? And in college, I got theory for it. And I built a framework around it. I'm in the progressive diversity movement. So, 2015, I'm all up in Oscar's So White. I'm like retweeting, I'm like, whatever it is that 21st century human beings do when they care about something, right? I read a report by Ann Case and Angus Deaton. The mortality rate amongst middle-aged working-class white folks has spiked so dramatically, the only comparison is AIDS in the 1980s. Same year. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, how do I pronounce that word? The first time the word opioid registered for me was 2015. Because you know why? I don't live in that America. Now, this isn't a comment on Oscar So White. Thank God for that movement. It's a comment on my bias. I mean, how did I miss the biggest public health crisis of 30 years? Inuit Eskimo, right? It's a stat. In counties in which there's a Whole Foods, 70% of the people vote Democrat. In counties where there's a Cracker Barrel, 70% of the people vote Republican. This is not a joke. My kids don't know what a Cracker Barrel is. That's not a joke. That's how Whole Foods they are, right? They just don't, they don't even know what it is. How am I helping? Right? How am I helping? Build your craft would be my fourth thing. And I don't really know exactly. I mean, I guess I wrote a book on it, Interfaith Leadership. Thanks, Mark, for getting it for everybody and for getting it for free, so I don't feel like I'm selling it right now, because if you hate me, don't take a copy, right? You can make that move. But I think part of the craft is just like, I'm looking for these examples. And I'm looking for times when I'm just like, how did I miss this? How did I not know this? Right? Fellow citizen, for me, that's a powerful phrase. You are a fellow citizen. I agree to give you power over my life. That's what the definition of citizen is. A fellow citizen, that person has power over my life. You can elect somebody who I can't stand. By the way, you did, And I don't know anything about you. So I'm going to tell a story about a moment that I noted, right? Because part of what I think building one's craft is, as I said, is just like being like, oh, I just honestly didn't even know you existed, right? And I know nothing about your story. My wife's got this great line when we watch the Olympics, right? And they do the brief biopic on the fascinating speed skater from the Chicagoland area, or the great snowboarder from Colorado or whatever. My wife's always like, I really hope they don't do this for the Chinese and the Russian athletes here, because I'll root for them. If I know that gymnast story, I can't root for the American team as strongly. So I want to give you one of those stories for me. And a tough one for me. So January 27, 2017 is a really interesting day in interfaith social justice work. I begin the day in DC and I end the day in, I guess the evening is in Atlanta and night is in Chicago. It's a 3-city day for me. And I get out of the Atlanta airport. It's like 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock at night. I'm going to speak at IFYC's Interfaith Leadership Institute, which we have in Atlanta that evening. And I see people with signs, Muslims are welcome. And I'm like, hey, thanks, but never happened before. What had happened in the afternoon while I was on the flight? Trump's Muslim ban had dropped. And folks started showing up, and I loved it. Like folks in kippas, right? Like folks with dots. Like it was an obviously interfaith crew of folks who'd showed up. So I go to the ILI and I weave this into my talk, right? And a bunch of students are like gung-ho about this. This is interfaith social justice work. We, from our different faith identities, inspirations, and backgrounds, are going to come together to oppose a racist and discriminatory new immigration policy. We're going to welcome folks in. Okay. So I'm on the flight back to Chicago that night, and I'm thinking, I had a really interesting similar moment in DC that morning. Was it an interfaith social justice moment? So here's what it was. I'm speaking to the presidents of CCCU colleges, evangelical Christian colleges. And why are they meeting in DC on January 27th? Because it's the day of the pro-life march. It's a really special day for them. First pro-life march in the history of the United States on the National Mall, in which a sitting vice president would speak. And in my hotel are all these kids, like high school and college students, running around with like lime green and neon orange and like bright yellow t-shirts, like the kind of shirts you see at kids wearing in airports heading off to mission trips, church trips. You all know these, right? They were all there for the pro-life march. I started looking at their t-shirts. This is a group, this is a Mormon group, it's a Catholic group, It's an evangelical group. And they're all walking around with little books, Bibles, Books of Mormon. And they're all sitting around tables. Are they talking about interfaith social justice? Is that interfaith social justice? Is it not interfaith social justice? Are these people not connecting their religious identities to a question that they would call a matter of justice and coming together from different religions to advance that idea of justice? So I wondered on that flight home to Chicago, what the overlap was between my crew in Atlanta that evening, that we're going to go to the airport at midnight with signs, and the crew in the morning. I mean, I guess theoretically you could do both, but I'm a sociologist, so I wonder how many people really do both. For how many people is it a vote mover, right? You actually vote, you actually move on that. And it occurs to me, like, my organization, we're really proud that our Interfaith Leadership Institutes have 400 or 500 people. You know how many people gathered on the National Mall that morning? Easily tens of thousands. Easily. Probably six figures. How did it take me 20 years in interfaith work and to be in their hotel to ask myself the question, are you an interfaith social justice movement? Are these two different tribes? What does it mean if you have them both in your class, both on your campus? Do you choose one? What if the other people are in your class and they know they're not chosen? They know who the Inuits and the Eskimos are. So, here's the story I'm going to end with. I'll let you interpret it as you will. So, toward the end of the prophet's mission, Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of God be upon him. There have been 3 wars with the Meccans. And he decides it's time for peace. And he goes to Mecca, and he brings his army with him. They dress in white. They go as pilgrims, not warriors. It is the fundamental duty of a Meccan to protect the Kaaba and to protect the pilgrim. Any pilgrim who wants to come can come circumambulate the Kaaba. So the Prophet Muhammad, I hope I'll be forgiven for attaching a 20th century reference, pulls a Jedi mind trick on the Meccans. He shows up as a pilgrim. And he and his army, dressed in pilgrim's garb, stops at a rendezvous point outside of Mecca called Hudaybiyah. And the Meccans send their generals to basically say, what the heck is going on? I mean, we fought 3 battles with you people, and now you're going to show up as pilgrims, and you want to enter the holy city? No way. And the Meccans, the Muslims say, you're required to let us in. It's your dignity, right? It's what Albanians would call your besa. This is your honor. You're required to let us in. And the Meccans say no way, and so they're at an impasse. And so the Prophet Muhammad, he negotiates a settlement, something called the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. And it is entirely in favor of the Meccans. The Prophet Muhammad says, okay, we won't enter Mecca. We will turn around and return to Medina. And by the way, any person who's converted to Islam who wants to return to Medina, we'll let them do it free passage. Prisoners of war that we've captured, you can have them back. It's entirely in favor of the Meccans with one thing: we will come back in a year and perform the circumambulations. We'll leave now, we'll give you your prisoners back, we'll give you whoever Muslims want to deconvert. It's fine, but we're going to come back in a year. Umar and Ali, people who wind up being one of the 4 Rashidun, rightly guided caliphs, right? They're amongst the closest companions to the Prophet Muhammad. They are incensed. They think that the Prophet has given away the store, right? First, you convince us to come as pilgrims and not warriors. We want to fight these people. Then we don't even enter Mecca. Then you create a treaty that gives them everything, and we're turning around and going home? Pfft, this is garbage. Comes time to sign the treaty. Abu Sufyan, the Meccan general, looks at it and says, I'm not signing this. Umar and Ali have had it up to here. They're like, now what's the problem? Abu Sufyan points to the signatory part under Prophet Muhammad, where it says, Prophet Muhammad. Abu Sufyan says, if I recognized you as a prophet, I wouldn't be in a war with you. I'm not signing a document that has you listed as a prophet. Ali and Umar stand and pull their swords. This is it. You have crossed the line. The Prophet Muhammad tells them to sheathe their swords, sit down, take the pen, strike the name prophet from the document. If the term prophet, by the way, the definition of Islam, La ilaha illallah Muhammad abduhu wa rasulullah. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is the servant and representative of God. This is the definition of Islam. Strike the term prophet from the document. Ali and Umar, they cannot bring themselves to do it. It is a direct command, not just from their general, not just from their governor, but from their prophet. They cannot bring themselves to do it. Muhammad, who is illiterate, who cannot see and read the term prophet himself in the document, says to Ali and Umar, give me the pen, show me where it says prophet, and he strikes the term himself. And you know what? He wins. That's it. All right. Taking my watch off so the blood can flow freely. Let's talk.
All right. I got a mic.
Thank you. For me, the biggest problem with the, where were we talking about it? Do they count? Are they doing that same introspection? When I think of us and them, I hear you criticizing yourself, saying that you aren't recognizing them as human. And then I think of my aunt and uncle who are definitely not recognizing other people as human and not worrying about it. And so it feels honorable and respectful for us to be doing that. I don't know what to say next because I only have a half-formed question.
So let's get a number of voices in the room. You've heard me yap for an hour. Let's get a number of voices in the room. Comments, insights, disagreements. Let's just get a number of voices in the room.
I guess I'm a Hindu, so with that perspective. The little bit that I've read, I'm part of some interfaith work here in Nashville and Murfreesboro. Most of the religions, or should I say the word faith, they were initially started by different prophets or saints to really uplift the human from these values of jealousy, me, I, and raise them to the higher platform of us, But it seems over time the history has taken a turn that, like you said, we're identifying ourselves now as tribe, that we are superior than you. You know, that seems to be happening ingrained, though it was started with a different thing in the mind. So what is your comment about that kind of foundation that needs to be propagated so that we are a tribe, but we are a rainbow, but a rainbow, after all, becomes white light, if you look at it scientifically. And I feel, I think it's time for the religions to rejuvenate that thought that was originally started, say, in time of Jesus or in time of any other prophets who originally started the religion. So what is your thought on that when you talk about tribalism and trying to integrate them?
Yeah, thank you for that. Great. So more voices, more voices.
Well, I think to your point, I think he answered that at the end. Because I would say that with the story, and I love that story in teaching world history of, I know that story about the prophet. And the thing is that it can't matter to you, because to me it would be a part of the tribalism that you have to get them over to thinking kind of like you so that you can resolve it. It can't be you. And I was sharing something earlier to say that growing up in segregation in the Deep South in South Louisiana, one of the things is that in our community, in our segregated black community, they would tell us, how bad hate is, and you can't carry that. And that we could not be like the other if it was so against who we were. And so we had to and people would say, well, let God handle it, because we can't control them. And on the second note, back to what the point of your presentation here, just this week, my U.S. history class, it's my world history class, we're on World War II. So when I get to the Holocaust, I've done this intermittently. So the students, I teach at Dillard University, somewhere between 1,100, 1,200 students, mostly historically black college, mostly black students. And so their assignment was that they had to become a Holocaust survivor. They could not read reports. They could not refer to notes. They had to be that person. And the first person who did that so stirred the class, saying, I am. And then on the end, she gave the whole story. I gave them links they could go to hear those stories. And these are all black students, African-American students, many of them coming from rural places where they have a heavy Southern religion, Protestant religion. And at the end, the person said, I am a Holocaust survivor. The students were so moved. Those who couldn't go that day said, I want to do mine. I have to tell my story. They were not saying, I have to tell the Holocaust survivor story. They were saying, I have to tell my story. And so they had to get into this person. And so after class on, what's today, Friday, the day before yesterday, students stayed around. And one of them said, I'm not naming this person, but this person said that that he didn't want to do this because he felt like as a black student, we shouldn't be doing this. But I could have had them talk about black people doing things, but I wanted them to get into the mindset to move and blur those lines. And anytime I've done that, students are so moved. Some students wrote numbers on their arms. Some students stood there and said it so passionately and got in and told the whole story. And one student told me, I didn't come Monday because I told my family what I was doing, and my family took me to a Holocaust museum. And I found my person, and I am her. And so this tribalism can, I'm not so naive to believe that we're going to wipe away, because I do believe in cultural significances, and I believe in cultural pluralism, and so on and so forth. But I do think that when we get into the head and the mind of the other and really truly become them, then we can live in that democracy that you're talking about.
Hey, right. About a week ago, I was in Mobile, presentation at the Alabama Political Science Association, and this is work students of mine and I have done. We looked at 90 groups. 45 of them practiced terrorism, 45 did not. They practiced nonviolence largely. We looked at paired samples, so you would have like the Basques with the ETA group, Catalonians in Spain, Uyghurs in China, Tibetans in China. Groups that largely practice by, FLQ versus a Quebec Independence Party. And this is what we found. We found that about 12% of all terrorist groups, they get a lot of publicity, they kill a lot of people, but only about 12% accomplished their goals. You got the independent territory. You took charge of government. You changed a policy, whatever you set out to do. The nonviolent groups achieve their goals 58% of the time.
Is it Dr. Patel?
You can call me Ibu.
Call it you. Okay.
Only Mark calls me
Ibu.
Dr. Patel. No, I'm just kidding. But he's introducing me.
My name's Noah, and I'm really glad that you chose to do something different and to say the dangerous thing, because what you said really, really hit me. Especially the part where you said the Inuits and the Eskimos, and you just kept coming back to that. Every single time that you said that point, it just hit me deeper every subsequent time. You can't, you better, I don't have to say it. You can barely go on a social network now without feeling some sort of anxiety. Most people here know that. You don't have to go very far to see an irrational response to everything that's going on in our country, the election of Donald Trump. And I'm going to admit my bias. I'm a liberal, I'm progressive. I take part in many of the same movements, the same social justice movements. And when he mentioned the Inuit versus Eskimo, it really, really struck me, because so many times I have failed to hold up the ideals that he talked about, the ideals necessary to create a diverse democracy. I felt horrible because so many times I failed to do that. 80% of my college comes from the surrounding areas. We're in Giles County. We're a very small college. 80% come from the surrounding areas, very rural areas. A lot of the people at this school voted for Donald Trump. And so many times, as a liberal, I was told, if you don't go against, if you are neutral, I forgot what the quote is, but I've been told so many times as a liberal that if you are neutral, then you stand on the side of the oppressor. But oftentimes I feel like within the liberal progressive movement, we kind of failed to be critical of ourselves. And I think we kind of almost use that as a weapon. Now, does that make sense? I feel like within the progressive movement, we have kind of started using that as a weapon against these people. And I think we've failed to understand this group of people that's been crying for a very long time, which is, I think, the rural communities, predominantly rural communities of America. So, I mean, this talk really slapped me in the face, as you can imagine. That's all I got. That's like a half-formed thought, but
I'll have
Let's
to
do
go
one-
around.
let's
Let's
do
do
one
one
more.
or two more.
Yeah, thank you for that. Appreciate you. Thank you.
I'm coming.
So as this makes its way around, I'm gonna ask a question. Is a campus or a divinity school a place where creeds are at war intelligibly, in which people are initiated into conflict? Or is it a place where you are inducted into orthodoxy? And that is a genuine question, right? A place where people are initiated into conflict, or a place where you are inducted into orthodoxy. Here are 12 views. Argue. Here's justice. Come hither.
My name is Veronica. I'm from South Carolina. I am a Christian. I'm a Lutheran Christian, and the reason I introduce myself that way is because right now the Lutheran Church of America is very much split down the middle. There's the ELCA and there's the NACL. In 2009, the ELCA made a decision to allow homosexual peoples to be ordained as pastors in our churches. And we lost a lot of congregations when that happened. And it's, you know, being a member of the Lutheran Church of the ELCA, it's not really affected me in my church. Well, this past Sunday, we had a seminarian wander into our church, and we all started introducing ourselves to him, and he very promptly told us that seminarians were not very popular people anymore because they preached the truths, and the truths were that we didn't let queers become ministers in our churches, and he started spewing some pretty hateful stuff. And we politely told him that we do allow homosexuals to become ministers in our churches. And another lady that was standing next to me told him, "Sir, I believe you're in the wrong church." And I invited him to have breakfast with me. And I sat down with him, and he had breakfast, and we talked about holistic medicine. We talked about how hard it is to be a seminarian/college student, you know, trying to make your way through all of the trials and errors. And after breakfast, he left. But that was a really eye-opening experience for me because church has always been a safe place. You know, when you have your faith and you're in your church or your mosque or your temple, your place of worship, it's your safe place. You always feel safe in your faith. You don't feel challenged. And last Sunday in my church, I was challenged. I was challenged to create this bridge where otherwise I really didn't want to talk to that man. And I see this need for dialogue and relationship. And I really think when we're discussing the us and them and trying to be as introspective and understanding as we can of the other, it's really a matter of building those relationships. Like your wife said, you know, if she knew the bio story for the Russians, she would be voting for them, you know, because it turns people into people. It brings them out of those tribes and those classifications that they've put themselves under, and it returns them to Inuits. It just turns us all into Inuits. And you break free of all of those previous labels that were put on there, and you can talk to one another as people who genuinely care about each other. And so I'm really excited about this conference and learning how to further my skill set in being able to do that and to figure out how to make this pluralistic democracy work.
One more.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nabal Wabdu, and similar to Veronica, I am from Columbia, South Carolina. I will say I was born and raised in Columbia, South Carolina, and it's been an interesting experience for me. There's not too many Muslim women who happen to wear the hijab. So as you can imagine, I've had different experiences that were not so great growing up, and continue, of course, to face them, especially during times that are changing. And of course, extremist groups such as ISIS are arising, and I've been, of course, attached to that, unfortunately. But my philosophy has and always will be, I actually started a Muslim Student Association on our campus. And the reason for doing so is not necessarily to just say that it was for Muslims, but one question that a lot of my friends had was, you know, what goes on within the Islamic faith? What is it like to be a young woman who happens to wear the hijab? So I decided to start the club in terms of promoting Islamic educational awareness, but also making connections to different faiths. So it's been changing. I mean, we actually had February 1st is known to be World Hijab Day, and I actually brought hijabs on our campus, and a lot of students tried it. Some of them really enjoyed it. Some of them didn't want to take it off. It received a lot of positive feedback. And some students, I will say, they were a bit scared. Some thought that it would be hot, or that it would be so thick on your head. But it teared down some boundaries that I've been trying to do for some time. But leading up to that, one of my questions that I had was, what if we think we recognize our biases, but we continue to say and do actions that can actually still bring harm to others? And I will be the first to say that I have biases, and I think sometimes I have gotten over it, but I don't necessarily know. So what would be the next step? And thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. So, wow, thank you for all of this. Thank you for the stories. Thank you for the insights. So I want to say, now I'm going to play the other side for a second. I don't just have biases. I have correct views. Sometimes they're the same thing, right? So I think I'm right about most things. Don't you? Right? So, but what do you do with that, right? What do you do when the bias and the correct view, in a particular situation, I know who I lean towards. And I imagine the people in the situation with me know it too, right? And I don't think it's like a full-on Inuit Eskimo thing, but it's probably 70-30. I don't feel bad about it all the time. Do you know what I mean? So I want to complicate. If you all are agreeing with my talk, I want to complicate that agreement a little bit. The other thing is, Noah's dude does not know how to let well enough alone. He's like, skate to the thinnest ice you can. So what do you do with that, right? And there's a set of biases that are I just didn't know, and I wish I did. Opioids, public health crisis and set of biases where I'm like, you're wrong, right? I instinct towards this person and away from you, and I don't want to make you feel like an Eskimo in the process, but this is the person's back I got, right? So I'm going to bring up a really complicated scenario. What do you do if you're in the United Methodist? Let's just say you're in the United Methodist Church, right? Let's just say it's not just a political community, but it's a sacred union. And let's just say there are divergent groups within said sacred union. And you can't split this trophy in half. Somebody knows what I'm talking about. Who's that? Right? Either this happens or it doesn't. These people get married or they don't. This person preaches or she doesn't. So, what do you do? I really don't know. I really don't know what you do in your situation, Mark, with the vet and the Muslim kid. I don't know. What do you do if you're in the United Methodist Church and you think to yourself, there is something sacred about the community? In fact, the fact that we can disagree is because we call ourselves part of a community. But I'm not going to let you not affirm this. I just don't think that I just think these things are really hard, right? And right now, what I am most interested in doing is complicating my own worldview. It's like basically if my exploration into the world is serving up stories that affirm my worldview, it's not because I'm so right, it's because my exploration is not especially adventurous, right? So I am really interested in okay, so this is not a hard enough scenario. What's a harder one? What's a harder one? Where do I get to a point where I'm like, these values are so in conflict. I value my friends. I value my view of justice. I value diverse community. What happens when it's in conflict, right? And part of what I want to say, I think, is that I actually think that is part of the sine qua non of an intellectual. Karl Popper, the kind of humanities version of falsification theory, right? It's a theory that's developed for the sciences, which basically says that if you believe in gravity, imagine we all do, as a scientist, your job is not to find all the instances in which gravity exists. It's to look for the ones where it doesn't work. Look for the cases that challenge your theory, right? I think the humanities version of that is I want to go out into the world and find cases that complicate my worldview. And actually, that's a victory. Do you see what I'm saying? The victory is not, here's another example of a story that affirms why all the movements I think are important, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, all of these things that I care about. Here's another story that affirms that. I want to look for cases that I think are really hard, in which if I'm in the Mark situation, I don't know what I do. So we have a couple minutes left. Kind of last thoughts on serious question, because I don't know the answer to this. Is a campus, a divinity school, a place that initiates people into conflict or that inducts people into a particular worldview? Of course, there's third ways, like some conflict, right? But we prefer this. But how does that look, right? And it's interesting, who chooses? Because the funny thing about a place like Texas Wesleyan, which is honestly, it's different than Swarthmore, right? You didn't choose that. It's one of the things I find fascinating about a set of these campuses. Many of you represent are on the, it's a 50-50 campus. It's probably a 50-50 campus politically, right? So are the kids there? I was a fellow at the University of Chicago Institute of Politics this January. 30 students in a seminar, and 2 conservative kids. Conservative kid came out to me at the end of 3 days, and he's like, you know what? I'm the only kid in this room who's getting his money's worth. Everybody else, everybody else shares the same assumptions. I have to explain myself over and over and over again. I'm the only one who gets my money's worth out of this place. It's a really interesting take. Really interesting take. So what's a campus? What's a college? What's an education? Serious question. Let's see folks who haven't spoken yet. Just 1 or 2, and then we'll go. There's a decent chance that I found a hole in this lake, and I've in the thinnest ice.
All right, I see
Yes,
2
your
hands.
hand was up earlier. I'm glad you put it up again.
I'll
Thank you
come
so
back
much.
to
And I definitely want to. Why don't we start here, please?
All right.
Thank you so much. My question is a little bit different and probably off topic, but it's about diversity. And growing up, because I'm from the Congo, growing up, I didn't really see diversity because you have all black people there, same views. And we have a lot of tribes there, that's true. But the base is kind of the same belief. I don't really see the difference that much. And coming here in America, it was interesting because you see people of different backgrounds, and you can really see diversity like in everything. And it's interesting actually, because I thought I was gonna be hurt or frustrated, but yes, I have been. But at the end of the day, I think it's a beautiful thing. And I'm more than before and every day willing to embrace diversity. But then my question is, at which point? Because I believe we are all made of the same substance. And of course, there's a beauty. I believe that life is not a one-way situation where everybody goes towards the same direction. There's different directions. But then, until when, Because we are all made out of the same substance. So we must have something in common, something that can make us kind of have the same, I won't say vision, but have something in common that will make us move towards something at least. And I get to the point where, for instance, I know love, we all see different things, but at least I believe, I don't know, maybe all of us here in this room believe love is the most powerful, but at the same time we have some people that just probably don't see love anymore as something powerful, there is so many diversity that I'm just wondering, until when, We are all made out of the same substance, so at some point we have to have something that is common, but it seems like there is every day a new diversity. So I think it's just fear that he's talking, fear of being surrounded by people that see nothing as me. I'm just wondering, so it might not be a complete question, I don't know, but I hope I was clear enough.
Yeah, you're totally clear. I think it's a really hard one. So I'll answer this briefly because I want to make sure that the question that I asked earlier, which is what is a campus? Are McIntyre and John Courtney Murray right? That it's a place where creeds are at war intelligibly, right? But I think part of what I write about in the book Interfaith Leadership is that we talk a lot about finding common ground, but I think actually it's a lot harder than that. I think part of what interfaith leaders do is they create common ground, right? Which is that to say they look at people who think that they have nothing in common, and they literally create activities, stories, modes of engagement in which those people now have common ground to stand upon. Right? Now, they don't invent it out of thin air, but it might not be apparent in the moment. And I think part of what distinguishes a leader who's bringing people together is literally the ability to create spaces in which it is easier for people in disagreement to cooperate. This hand's been up for a while, and then why don't we go, just because it's closer, we'll do a last couple things, and then I will let you go off into the Nashville night.
All right, we'll just do this one over here.
So I'll start off with a quote. I think Socrates said this, and that is, the only thing I know is I know nothing, but I'll give it a shot anyways. I think this may be a bit of a controversial point that I'm about to say, but I believe that not all conflict can necessarily be solved, and that sometimes To your question, it's important to recognize that you may not be able to solve conflict. I can think of one particular region in this world that has a very rich history of conflict that goes back generations and decades, and it's still ongoing today. And really, the arguments on both sides are still out there, and they're really very passionate, very often very emotional. And I don't think that I can go in there and just fix it by myself, or any one person can fix it by themselves. And so you mentioned that being in interfaith work is about creating spaces where people can cooperate. I take a different take on that. I think it's a place where you create spaces for conflict. You create room for conflict and room for conversation around that conflict. Because sometimes you may not be able to convince the other person that you're right or that make them change their mind. You may not be able to. And personally, I don't think that's really the point, change their mind. I think that it's to acknowledge the different mindsets that are out there and seeing where they overlap and where they don't, and respecting that, and not necessarily trying to force over your view on someone else to convince them that you're right, or back away and say, oh, you know, you're right, I'm not going to even bother with this one anymore. Interfaith spaces are about creating space for common ground, but it's also about creating room for conflict, room for ambiguity, and room where there may not be a clear answer, and being able to live with that tension in mind and still keep going and not be torn apart by it. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. I'm very grateful you said that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I wonder if perhaps if we understood conflict and cooperation in a particular way, there's different definitions of these words, but maybe if we understood them in a particular definition, there is a way to understand those terms or to use similar terms in ways where both are taking place, right? So the language that I have found for this, inadequate as it might be, is how do you disagree with people on some fundamental things, have unresolved conflict, and agree to work together on other fundamental things, often when that agreement is not explicit, right? Which is to say, you recognize that it's implicit, it's unspoken. There is a whole set of unresolved conflicts on major matters, and there's also cooperation, which is different than agreement, right? So one of the places I think that this takes place all the time, and there's one of these, a block from here, it's a hospital. I mean, I promise you, at Vanderbilt Hospital, there are doctors who disagree on major things, marriage, immigration policy, voted differently, and they're saving somebody's life in a surgery right now. Would we have it another way? Serious question, right? Like, can you imagine a situation where a doctor walking into a heart surgery sees whatever it is, a Hillary pin on the street clothes of another doctor, and says, I can't perform surgery with you. I'm sorry. I can't do this with you. My sense is that actually some version, the different version that happens all the time, which is these doctors, they probably have a sense of where the other person, their colleague, stands on a variety of things, and they save lives together anyway. For me, that's the definition of a diverse democracy, right? The definition of a diverse democracy is you can disagree on some fundamental things, in part because what am I going to do about it? I don't like the disagreement. I wish you agreed with me on everything. But what am I going to sacrifice doing heart surgery with you because you voted differently from me? By the way, it's not like that's never happened. It's not like there are not societies and situations in which people say, I can't work with this person. So for me, I hope that a particular definition of conflict and cooperation allows them to both be true words and sit in a creative tension with each other. Okay, last comment. We had a hand up here.
I'm over here with the mic.
All right, she'll shout.
Oh. It's your mic. Okay, I'm just gonna. Here I come. True words.
So I was debating on whether or not to bring this up, but I'm a nurse by trade, but I'm also an educator. And so just recently in the hospital setting, I work in the cath lab. So a lady not far from Giles County had a procedure done. And I'm actually physically in the room because she needs me to remove the sheath from her groin. So that means I'm going to be in there holding on her groin for about 20 minutes. So that allowed for 20 minutes of a barrage of questioning by to myself from her husband, which started this way. Oh, my husband, yes, he's a United Methodist pastor. And her husband says, oh, wonderful. Oh, but isn't it a shame that, they're having all of that gay marriage, and that's just going to be a terrible thing. And I said, how is that a terrible thing? And he says to me, well, it's going to divide the church. And I said, it absolutely is. And he said, well, it has to happen. I said, well, does it? Does it have to happen? And so it began this conversation. I said, well, it's all about relationships. Everything that you deal with and your belief system and your values change over one relationship. And I said, I did not grow up in a family where I had an opportunity to know and love someone that was gay, and I do now. And so, no, I do not feel that way. He said, well, what about your son? You said you have a son. What would you do if he was gay? I said, we told him he's 10 years old. However you feel, whomever you want to love and bring into our home, we want you to be happy and feel good about that. And so I think my half statement is that I don't think that I changed that man's mind that day. I certainly was sweaty. But I do think that I finished out that conversation with him of saying that in anything that I do, I can't know what is exactly right for someone else, and I can choose love. I can choose love. And so in this process, I think, of us figuring things out, I think it is a beautiful thing to mention that we can sit in our conflict and not resolve it. And we can keep going back and having to check someone's groin and answer more questions about gay marriage. And we can keep having these conversations. I think we have a great way of being like Teflon when it comes to these conversations and twirling our ways out of them. And I think that when we're forced to sit in them, I loved what you said so beautifully, that when we're forced to sit in our conflict and recognize that there is no point of resolution that is to be had, and yet still be in communion with one another in some way, that to me is the beauty of love.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, Brian, I'll send you off with this line, but Brian McLaren says, Ms. Tony Campolo, both of them, he's like, this is Tony Campolo from his wife, actually, right? Said his wife said this first. I would rather be wrong in the head and right in the heart than the other way around every time. I'd rather be wrong in the head and right in the heart every time. Thanks, everyone.